Welcome back to Revise and Resubmit, and welcome to another weekend book review. I'm Pavlov.
And I'm Nikita. You know, today we are tackling a topic that is, it's going to kind of shake up how you see the world.
Oh, I like where this is going.
We're diving deep into the idea of simulation. And to guide us, we're using this really cool book, Computing Legacies.
Great book.
Yeah. Chapters 1 and 3 especially have some mind-blowing stuff about how simulations are, everywhere and how they shape, everything.
It's true. I mean, people tend to think of simulations as, like a video game or something super high-tech.
Right, yeah.
But it's really a way of thinking, a way of understanding the world. That's been with us for ages.
The book calls them cultural techniques, the tools we use to, make sense of everything. So simulation fits right in there, huh?
Absolutely. It's all about models, asking those what-if questions.
Mm-hmm.
And by doing that, we learn, we test things out, we make sense of stuff, even if it's not real.
And those simulations, they really are everywhere. Think about movies, right?
Oh, yeah. CGI, special effects, entire worlds that, never existed but feel so real on screen.
And architects, they use simulations to design those crazy buildings before, a single brick is laid.
Exactly. And think beyond the visual, too. Economists use simulations all the time, trying to figure out, okay, if we change this policy, what happens to the market?
Whoa, yeah. Could you even imagine trying to, run a government without simulations to test out ideas before you actually, implement them?
It would be a disaster. It reminds me of those early examples of simulation, like thought experiments, Thales of Miletus.
I don't think I've met him.
Well, he was way back in ancient Greece, famously fell into a well because he was so busy staring at the stars, lost in thought. Classic case of a guy lost in a simulated scenario.
Haha, so even daydreaming is a kind of simulation, but then you have something like chess. That's a simulation of, straight up warfare.
Oh, definitely. Chess is the model of combat before, gunpowder came along, and the strategy involved. It's no wonder it was used for military training for, centuries.
Yeah, and then, fast forward to the 19th century, you have the Prussians developing Kriegspiel.
Oh, yeah. That's a whole other level. Kriegspiel, it was this intricate war game that military leaders all over the world adopted.
So cool. It's instead of actually having a battle, you could play it out, see what might happen.
Exactly. And it let commanders test out strategies, think about, the possible outcomes without actually having to go to war.
Wow. So from thinking about the stars to planning entire battles, it seems like humans have always used simulations to deal with the unknown.
Oh, for sure. But then things really exploded with the arrival of, computers, right?
I mean, yeah, computers were a total game changer.
Oh, absolutely. Suddenly we had the power to crunch crazy complex what-if scenarios in no time at all.
Things that would have taken teams of people weeks or even months to figure out.
Yeah, now we can do those same calculations in seconds. It was a revolution for science and engineering especially.
They could suddenly experiment with stuff that would be way too dangerous or expensive to try in real life.
Exactly. But, all this computational power brings up a really interesting philosophical question. Can a simulation really capture reality? I mean, if it's just a model, right?
How accurate can it even be?
Well, the book gets into this idea that's kind of wild. It says simulations don't just reflect reality, they actually, shape it.
Whoa, that's deep.
Think about it. You see, a picture-perfect beach online, and then you go visit it in person. But because of the simulation, you've already got these expectations.
Oh, yeah. And those expectations, they might not even match up with the real thing.
Right. So in a way, we're always experiencing the world through this lens of simulations, whether we realize it or not.
It's kind of trippy when you think about it like that. Speaking of which, let's get into a fun example of how simulations have, totally infiltrated our culture. The lasting love for 8-bit music.
Oh, yeah. This one's a classic example of how limitations, those tech constraints of early gaming hardware can actually, spark some awesome creativity.
Okay, break it down for me. What exactly is 8-bit music? For someone who didn't grow up with the glorious sound of a dial-up modem.
Think back to those classic video game soundtracks. Super Mario Bros., Pac-Man, Tetris.
Oh, yeah. I love those.
Those are all 8-bit. Those iconic sounds, they came from early computer chips that had some serious limitations, limited waveforms, a tiny number of channels.
So instead of being totally frustrated, these composers just embraced those limitations.
They had to. And you know what? Those limitations actually gave 8-bit music its unique sound, its character.
It's necessity is the mother of invention, right?
Right on. And what's super cool is that even as tech got better, 8-bit didn't just vanish. It transformed into its own genre chiptune.
I've heard of that.
You hear it everywhere now. Pop music, TV shows, even art installations. It's wild how those early limitations led to something so influential.
Yeah, it really shows you how unexpected and far-reaching these legacies of simulation can be. But of course, not all simulations are quite so cheerful. Things get a bit more intense when we start thinking about espionage and surveillance.
Yeah, no doubt about that. The ability to create these hyper-realistic virtual worlds, it's definitely caught the attention of certain agencies.
The book has a whole chapter called Troll Security. What's the deal with that?
Well, it's playing on the idea of internet trolls, those folks who love to, cause chaos online. But in this context, the trolls are actually intelligence agencies using these virtual worlds for their own purposes.
Okay, hold on. So we're talking about real spies operating in simulated environments. Is this like a scene out of a movie, or is this actually happening?
It's very real, and it's been going on longer than you think. Way back in 2008, there was this report from the Office of the Director of National Intelligence that specifically warned about the potential for virtual worlds to be used for, espionage and even terrorist activities.
Whoa, they were onto this back then. But why virtual worlds? What's the advantage? Isn't real world espionage, more real?
Well, think about it. Virtual worlds offer this insane level of anonymity.
True.
A spy can create a fake avatar, blend right into a virtual crowd, gather intel, all without ever revealing their true identity.
They could be anyone, anywhere.
Exactly. And because these virtual worlds are often global, right?
Yeah.
They can access people and information from all over the place. It's like having a network of invisible informants.
That is both kind of brilliant and a little creepy at the same time. So we're talking about virtual worlds as a new battleground for espionage.
That's one way to look at it. And as these virtual worlds become even more realistic and immersive, the line between what's real and what's simulated, it gets even blurrier.
Yeah, this is where things start to feel like the Matrix a bit.
Well, the book actually does bring up concerns about these virtual worlds being used to train terrorists or even simulate attacks, recruit new members. It's a whole new set of security threats that, we're still figuring out.
Wow, this is definitely giving me a lot to think about. All right, Vineland, let's take a moment to process all this before we jump into part 2. When we come back, we'll be tackling the question of how we preserve all this digital history and the challenges of keeping the past alive in the digital age.
It really makes you think, about these virtual worlds we were just talking about. How do they get preserved for, future generations? It's not exactly like putting a painting in a museum, is it?
It's a great point. Chapter 2 of Computing Legacies really dives into this. How do you capture something as fluid and ever-changing as the digital world?
It's a tough one. The book throws out this question, can the internet itself be a museum of computing? I mean, think about it. So much of our history is totally intertwined with the digital realm now.
Right, but then how do you even curate something that massive? It's like trying to, bottle a cloud or something.
Exactly. The book mentions just the sheer volume of information as a huge hurdle.
Oh, for sure. It's mind-blowing how much data we create every single day. Text messages, emails, videos, social media. Where do you even begin to decide what's worth saving?
Right. And then there's the whole issue of technological obsolescence.
Yeah.
It's not like preserving a physical artifact where you can just, put it in a vault and forget about it.
It's true. What happens when the hardware or the software you need to access that information just doesn't exist anymore?
That's a massive challenge.
Yeah.
It's like having a treasure chest full of amazing things, but the key has been lost to time. Imagine trying to access, a floppy disk from the 80s without a compatible computer.
You'd be totally out of luck.
Exactly. So are we doomed to lose these huge chunks of our digital history?
Yeah.
Just because tech keeps, moving forward?
I hope not.
Yeah.
But what can we even do about it?
Well, the book talks about some pretty clever approaches to digital preservation. One method is called migration. Basically, it's transferring data from old, outdated formats to newer ones.
So back in the day when everyone was copying their VHS tapes onto DVDs so they could still watch them.
Exactly. You're updating the format to keep the content, accessible. But even migration has its limits. What happens when those DVDs become obsolete? You got to keep transferring the data over and over again, and that can get pretty expensive and time-consuming.
It's like a never-ending cycle.
It is. So is there a way to like preserve the original format, even if the tech to access it vanishes? Well, that's where emulation comes in.
Okay, tell me more.
Essentially, you're creating a virtual version of the original hardware and software. That's like building a digital time machine, letting you run those old programs on a modern computer.
Whoa. So like you could theoretically walk into a museum and actually use a virtual version of one of those like early computers that took up an entire room.
You could. You could see how they worked, experience what it was like to program on those machines. It would give you a whole new appreciation for how far we've come.
Seriously. From those giant clunky machines to like the sleek smartphones we have today.
It's mind-blowing. And emulation helps us bridge that gap, you know, connect with the past, understand how we got to where we are today.
Right.
But it's not just about like old computers and games. Think about all the digital art, music, literature being created right now.
Yeah. What happens when the software platforms they rely on become obsolete? Are we going to lose all of that?
It's a legitimate concern. That's why digital preservation and emulation are so important.
Yeah.
It's not just about, you know, clinging to the past, but making sure future generations have access to like the richness and diversity of our digital heritage.
I agree.
It's a massive task. But luckily, there are some brilliant minds working on it.
That's reassuring. But it brings up another interesting thought. What do we lose in the process of digitizing everything? Is there a trade-off between like preserving the past in this digital form and losing something in the translation?
Now that's a thought-provoking question. We're constantly told that the future is digital, but what about, you know, the tangible, the physical, those things you can hold in your hand, feel the texture of, are they becoming like relics of the past?
Yeah, makes you wonder if there's a balance to be struck. Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about another fascinating application of simulation, one that's a bit more controversial, the use of virtual worlds for espionage and surveillance.
Yeah, that's been a hot topic lately, especially with online gaming getting like more and more realistic.
For sure. And the book dives right into this with a chapter called Troll Security. What's that all about?
It's a play on words, you know, referencing those internet trolls, folks who just love to stir up trouble online. But here, the trolls are actually like intelligence agencies using these virtual worlds for their own covert operations.
Okay, hold up. So we're back to real-life spies, but this time they're operating in like simulated environments. What kind of implications does that have?
Well, for one, it raises a lot of questions about privacy and security. Imagine being totally immersed in your favorite online game, right? And you have no idea that some government agency might be, you know, watching your every move.
It's a bit unsettling, to say the least. It sounds like something out of a science fiction novel. Is this really happening?
Oh, it's happening. And it's been going on for a while now. Back in 2008, there was a report from the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, and they specifically warned about the potential for virtual worlds, like Second Life and World of Warcraft, to be used for espionage and even like terrorist activities.
Wow. So the intelligence community has been aware of this threat for quite some time, but why virtual worlds? What's the appeal? Isn't real world espionage more, you know, real?
You think so, but virtual worlds offer some unique advantages when it comes to gathering intelligence. Like, for one, they offer this level of anonymity that's super hard to achieve in the real world. A spy can just create a fake avatar, you know, blend into a virtual crowd, and gather information without anyone ever knowing their true identity.
So they could be anyone, anywhere, without raising any suspicion.
Exactly. And because these virtual worlds are often global, they can access information and people from, you know, all corners of the world. It's like having this network of invisible informants.
That's both incredibly ingenious and like a little terrifying at the same time. So basically we're talking about virtual worlds becoming a whole new battleground for espionage.
That's one way to put it. And as these virtual worlds become even more realistic and immersive, that line between what's real and what's simulated gets even blurrier.
It's starting to feel like, you know, the Matrix all over again.
Right. The book even mentions concerns about these virtual worlds being used to like train terrorists, simulate attacks, even recruit new members. It's a whole new dimension of security threats that, honestly, we're still trying to fully understand.
Yeah, this is definitely a lot to process. All right, everyone, let's take a pause here and come back for part 3, where we'll dive into a fascinating case study, a simulation of higher education. All right, welcome back to the deep dive. So we've been exploring this whole world of simulations, and now we're going to like shift gears a bit. We're going to talk about how simulations are being used in a place you might not expect higher education.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Chapter 5 of Computing Legacies talks about this simulation game called Virtual U, and it's pretty fascinating.
Virtual U. I've heard of that.
Oh, have you?
Yeah. It's like it gives you a glimpse into the minds of like university administrators, all the challenges they face.
It was designed to help them like make those tough decisions, right? By simulating all kinds of crazy scenarios.
Exactly. Budget cuts, faculty hiring, student protests, you name it. Virtual U throws it at you.
So it's kind of like a flight simulator, but for like university presidents.
That's a great way to put it. You're thrown right into the deep end.
Yeah.
Got to make strategic choices, keep the whole university afloat.
I bet that's more stressful than it sounds, but I can see how it would be valuable. Like, what are some of the insights that come out of playing this game?
Well, one of the big ones is this tension between, academic ideals and the reality of finances. You have to constantly balance the university's core mission, teaching, research, all that good stuff, with the very real need to, keep the lights on.
That's a tough balancing act. Most people probably don't even think about that.
It's a constant struggle. And Virtual U forces you to confront those tough decisions head on. Like, do you invest in shiny new facilities? Or increase financial aid for students? Do you pump money into research? Or hire more teaching faculty?
Whoa, yeah, those are some real-world dilemmas right there.
Exactly. Yeah, it makes you realize that running a university is way more complicated than, like, just giving lectures and grading papers.
No kidding. So Virtual U is basically like pulling back the curtain on all the complexities of managing a university.
Absolutely. And it also reveals some interesting assumptions about what we consider success in higher education.
Oh, like what?
Well, the game puts a lot of emphasis on financial metrics. Things like, endowment growth, alumni donations, research grants.
Yeah.
Kind of reflects that pressure universities are facing these days to be more like businesses, to focus on the bottom line.
Which makes you wonder, are we losing sight of what universities are truly for? Is it just another business, or is there something more to it? Virtual U seems to suggest that the line is getting pretty blurry.
That's the big question. And it gets to the heart of what we've been talking about this whole time, how simulations shape our understanding of, well, everything.
They're powerful tools.
They are. We've seen how they help us understand complex systems, like test out ideas, influence our culture. But we got to remember, simulations are built on, like, assumptions, on data that might not be complete or, totally unbiased.
So we should approach them with, like, a critical eye, right?
Exactly. Don't just blindly accept the results of a simulation as the absolute truth. You got to question those assumptions, consider those potential biases, and really think about the implications,
It's like with anything else, we've got to be informed consumers of information, no matter where it comes from, whether it's a book, a news report, or even like a simulation.
Well said. This deep dive into computing legacies has really given us a lot to think about. What do you say?
Oh, absolutely.
From that long history of simulation to how it's shaping our reality, from preserving our digital history to the ethical concerns around virtual espionage, and even how we view higher education. It's clear that simulations are just going to play a bigger and bigger role in our lives.
And as that happens, it becomes even more important for all of us to think critically about how these tools are being used.
I couldn't agree more. The big question for all of us now is, how do we ensure that simulations are used responsibly, ethically, and for the benefit of everyone?
That's definitely a question worth pondering.
And don't forget to subscribe to Revise and Resubmit on Spotify and Apple Podcasts for more captivating deep dives like this one. And if you're enjoying the show and want to support us in creating more insightful content, consider becoming a patron on Patreon. Every contribution helps us continue this journey of exploration and discovery. Until next time, keep those minds curious, keep questioning, and keep revising and resubmitting.